see. All right. So the reason I sent you those links for the PPR is because the PPR is an exam that tests our ability to design and implement effective instruction and engaging instruction for all of the various students that we could possibly come across in our classroom. That means special ed, that means 504, that means gifted and talented, socioeconomically disadvantaged, kids going through, divorce, kids experiencing a death, whatever situation that the students that we have in the classroom, we need to be able to plan and design best for them, the way their brain works, their learning preferences. And so all of that is pedagogy. And all of that is necessary. I'm looking for us right now. Where's all my LOTE stuff? Okay. All of that is necessary in order for us to be able, the students to be able to achieve their learning goals, right? And that doesn't matter if you're a LOTE Spanish teacher, it doesn't matter if you're a math teacher, if you're a theater teacher, health science technology. The pedagogy part of it is your designing of the lesson, your designing of instruction, and the different activities that you choose, the different strategies that you choose in order to teach a concept, the different mode of, design and what I mean by that is are you going to be modeling? Are you going to teach them by them doing? Is it going to be an inquiry-based activity? And then at the same time, and that has to do with academics, but then at the same time, and this is especially true for the Spanish LOTE teacher, you are to be helping them acquire a second language. Yours is specifically your academic content area is helping them acquire a second language. But you have students who are going to be, let's say, also acquiring English, at the same time, acquiring better English at the same time. And so all the teachers that teach math, science, social studies, they're not only tasked with helping the students, achieve learning goals with their content area, math, science, social studies, theater, but to acquire that second language. And so the Spanish teacher has an interesting sort of flipped scenario where your content is acquiring a second language. And as you get in the older ages, and we'll discuss that in the pedagogy, you're not only helping them acquire better Spanish at those higher levels at high school, right? Those secondary levels. You're not only doing that, you are also assessing and helping build their reading abilities in that language, their speaking, so their ability to comprehend, the ability to write, and that becomes more complex as they get older, right? Until they get to, let's say, senior level AP, Spanish 4 or something like that. I remember when I took Spanish 4 and we were, the class was Spanish. The goal was learning more Spanish at a higher level, right? That was the goal of the class. But in addition to that, I'll never forget. And my professor de Santos at Med High, his job, and I'll remember some of the exercises, reading Don Quixote de la Mancha, and then being in cooperative learning groups and having questions that we had to discuss about our readings, not in English, but in Spanish, discuss really sort of complicated concepts about literature within the context of using that language proficiently. So as a language other than English teacher, in the very beginnings, your job is sort of laying down the foundation for an appreciation of culture, for an appreciation of the language, motivation to learn the language, sort of building that within your campus and your class, and then building that foundational skills, the grammar, the linguistics portion of it. It's all linguistics, but the practicing of it, the oral, speaking in different areas in context, social implications, and then getting even more deep into it, utilizing everything that they learned to actually study the language, its literature, and get deeper into the language. So that is sort of the goal for a language other than English teacher. And for your purposes, we're talking about Spanish, because remember, there are language other than English teachers that do Arabic, that do German, that do, and those jobs are less common than the LOTE Spanish, because it is one of the most spoken languages, on planet Earth. So too is Mandarin. So we have a large population of LOTE other than English Mandarin. So let's take a look at your standards. This is the document that is sort of like the birth of every content area. So this is where the state begins documenting everything that a teacher needs to be able to know about that content area and about teaching and to be able to do. And so here are the specific standards that are required of you. And this document is actually the document that gets sent to the test maker. And the test maker uses this document. They organize these standards, sometimes differently, sometimes they keep them the same, and bunch up a couple of standards and make it domain this and whatnot. But this is where the test makers get the scenarios, get the concepts and terminology with which to assess you guys with. So it behooves every Texas teacher to have at least read through their content specific state standards to see what is it that the state requires that I know of my content area, and what is it that they expect that I should be able to do in my content area. And this document lays it out for us. So I'm going to explain to you how to read, but I wanted to just take a moment to see if you got any questions so far.
No. I don't have any questions. Go ahead.
All righty. So we're going to take a look at the first one. So we have, and whenever I do a critical reading, because I was an English teacher for well over a decade, a deep reading includes highlighting things, writing on it, expanding things via dialogue with the text, meaning if I might make notes and jot extra things down so that I get a deep understanding of what this document is about and how best I can use it for my purposes in my classroom. So I would recommend, for every teacher to just print out their standards document. Just make one copy that you keep from the beginning of your teaching career to the end of it, because this is what your whole content area is built on. So we have the standard up top, and then you have the two different columns. You have the left side, which is teacher knowledge, what you need to know. And then you have the right side, which is application, like what you need to be able to do. So let's take a look at what standard 1 says. It says the language other than English teacher understands language learning theory. So right here, if you, hold on 1 second, my dog is barking all crazy leg. A million apologies. Okay, so
It's fine.
Language learning theory. So right away, that's like, I know that there are several, and I need to make sure that I know the different language learning theories already. So as I come across them, I'm going to, write them down, come across them in my studying. Principles of second language acquisition. And then you use this, and you have to do this action using this knowledge to plan instruction and assessment that promotes student success for all students in all areas of language learning as defined in the Texas Essential Knowledge and Skills. So the TEKS, just highlighted almost everything. So promoting student success, that means you are helping them achieve specific learning goals, specific learning objectives. And those learning objectives are laid out for you in the TEKS. The TEKS lay out what specific things the student should be able to do. They should be able to, write in a complete sentence, and then they should be able to like talk in different, use language in different social settings, right, in the classroom, in like between friends, and identify the difference in speaking instances and how that translates into writing. So much of what we do in English language arts and reading, those are going to be some of the same things, the same learning objectives that you're going to need to do with your students every day, but not in English, in Spanish. The same sort of language objectives, but in a different language. So let's take a look at what you need to know in order to achieve, proficiency, I should say, in standard 1. You have 1.1K. And again, everything on this side, these are knowledge standards. This is going to be everything you need to learn about second language acquisition and what it's like for somebody who is learning a second language, different things that might impede on their ability to be motivated to learn a second language. So we'll take a look at them. 1.1K, the theories and processes of interlanguage development, including predictable patterns in second language development and factors affecting the time required to learn a language. So breaking that apart, if you didn't know the theories and processes of interlanguage development, then you should Google theories and processes of interlanguage development. And I have the Google Drive that has a Mometrics booklet that has, those written in there. So you just have to look them up and reread them. But there are predictable patterns. There's predictable mistakes, predictable difficulties, trends that we see in language learning, and utilizing that knowledge to plan and select best for the students that you have in the classroom when you have them. So factors affecting the time required to learn a language. So for instance, for an ELL student who is learning English as a second language while they are immersed in class, they're probably going to become more proficient more quickly than, let's say, a student in one class, a Spanish class, right, that they take once or twice, because of the time and the attention that is put in the two different language learning scenarios. The ELL student, in theory, has all of their teachers, math, science, social studies, English language arts, PE, art, doing not only their content area, but language learning strategies in order to help them better and quickly acquire English as a second language. It's not going to be the same. We cannot expect for the kids taking German and they only practice it when they're there in their class of 45 minutes for that year to get the same time and attention. So things to think about: general learning theories and processes relevant to language acquisition. Processes, what does that mean? Okay, well, you have to practice speaking. That's one of the processes of language acquisition. And listening and speaking skills are what we develop before. And this is natural for every language that there is. It is also true for people learning English as a first language and as a second language. When you're born, you don't know any language and you don't know how to read and you can't write. You first learn by listening and you watch and you babble and your mouth starts to make certain words. Now, clearly the brains of students are more developed than infants. And so, but by immersing them in a language rich environment where they are constantly being given examples of proficient speaking in that target language, and then followed up with opportunities to practice their own oral language proficiency in the target language, those are processes that are relevant to second language acquisition, and that we know based on language learning theories work. You have to practice the language. Every language has specific phonemes that are just unique to them. Some of them, there are phonemes in German that are not spoken in English and that are not spoken in Spanish, and likewise vice versa through all of the languages. And so the individual speech sounds and the individual way in which our tongues and our anatomy move to make sounds is different across different languages. And so practicing moving the tongue, moviendo la lengua, and my grandma used to say when we were practicing Spanish and we would get tongue tied, suelta la lengua, so that we could, just practice it. And you through practicing, through constant opportunities to use newly acquired language that you directly instructed and then modeled for them, opportunities to talk with peers, opportunities to talk with you, opportunities to go out and interview other people on the campus, utilizing the target language. All of that practice helps build and reinforce language acquisition. And that's what they're talking about here on this left-hand side. Everything that we know about, language and the theory and what science says based on research paper and research study and research and what we've long since been studying language and language acquisition. So theories and processes of second language instruction and assessment. So how do we best instruct second languages and how do we best assess them? The different communicative approaches and content-based approaches. So for instance, let's say you are teaching the kids to learn a group of vocabulary, right? And you want them like maybe shopping or something like that. And so you choose a reading that is going to be maybe connected to them some way about like the mall or something that might interest them. And so that concept of making it tied to something that's connected to them, or making them making their learning experience resonate because it connects to real world things, like they've all been to a mall, so they can say like, and to different shops, which are tiendas. And so that you could do something, and that learning about learning vocabulary in context, of something, for some reason solidifies in the brain more, like if they make two connections at once. So the different content-based approaches. So let's take a look at the right-hand side. This is the application side. What you need to be able to do when you get into the classroom. And this is taking everything that you know and applying it into the classroom setting. On the exam, they're going to give you a scenario and tell you, give you hints as to the level of proficiency in the target language that the student is. And then you'll have to make a decision in the answer choices on how best to plan or select or create an instructional or assessment practices that reflect established current knowledge or emergent research. So how to best plan for your students, designing instruction and assessment to meet the needs and promote all students' success as language learners. So meeting the students' needs, that is a loaded phrase. That means making sure you remember their various learning styles. So if they tell you some of your students are tactile learners, you better be including kinesthetic activities in your lesson. So utilizing the knowledge that they give you in the scenario and how this would transfer to the real world is the knowledge that you have of your students in the class. So we should be creating lessons based on who we specifically have, what their proficiency is with the target language or in the content. For your purposes, it's target language, and their learning styles, and or other needs. That means if they're special ed, if they're 504, if they're having a rough time, a meltdown, and they're on a behavior plan. So taking all that into consideration when you are planning the design of your instruction and the different assessments that you'll be using. So we have different learning styles. We have visual, tactile, which is touching, and auditory, which is, hearing. And if you're going to differentiate instruction, that means that you are providing different pathways for student success. Oh, I hate it when it does that. Different pathways for student success. Let me try to read this. Oh, wait. What you was. So differentiation is providing different pathways for student success. So like in a lesson, I'm going to direct instruct all new vocabulary. I'm going to think, pair, share so people can, practice oral language proficiency and using the vocabulary that we just, learned. That's going to help my auditory learners by hearing it and saying it. And then I'm going to have like some visuals to correlate with all of my new vocabulary. And I'm also going to do a, what is it called? Foldable chart, a foldable with the new vocabulary, and we'll put the visuals in there. So they're talking about it, listening to each other talk about it, folding paper, gluing things in the visuals, and that would be different ways for the student differentiation of that vocabulary so that my students would have several different pathways to success, and success is their understanding of that new vocabulary word. Any questions so far?
These all of this differentiation techniques and all of that, that's pretty much kind of like I remember when the lesson plan thing was placed, they kind of like gave me like a little, not story, but like example where I had to focus kind of that activity.
Right.
This is where I can put it, right?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. And it's different supports for student success. And so in the focus activity in the beginning of your lesson, you certainly want to, and it's another sort of sheltered instructional strategy, which is something that we utilize for our ELL students to help our ELL students, but sheltered in instructional strategies, they're actually, good for everyone. But when you are beginning a lesson, let's say you're beginning a unit, and I'm going to do Don Quixote de la Mancha, because that's just what stays in my head for my English 4, not Spanish 4. And so what I was saying about that, it just reminded me about Mr. De Santos. When he was walking around listening to our cooperative learning groups, he wasn't just listening to how well we were speaking Spanish, right? How well we were, talking, discussing. He was looking to see, are they understanding author's perspective in Don Quixote de la Mancha? Like, are they really understanding the characterization of Sancho, right? Or what was Cervantes like meaning, his purpose? What was he saying? What was the overall like historical So it goes beyond just the scope of the language now as we get larger and build onto that. And that depends on where you're teaching on the spectrum, right? If you're part of a school that, has language and it's building that love of a second language early, then they're going to have more proficiency. But depending on what they tell you in the scenario, they'll tell you, let's say they're super beginners or they're intermediates, or they're like high, possibly. I'm not sure how often they differentiate in their scenarios, but based on where they are on their level, you should know, the difficulty, like where they are developmentally. Young children can't think abstractly. We're going to have to build the love of language and really build the foundational stuff. And as you get older, you can talk and do more complex things. But with all of them, we have to understand, and let me go back to my drawing thing, understand the role of student characteristics, their motivation, their first language background, their developmental characteristics, the developmental characteristics of the students that you have there, their first language background. So if their first language is German and they came over in the 6th grade and English is their second language, and now they're in your Spanish, that's important. And you should take that into consideration. And anytime there's crossover, or you can talk about, in Germany and this and that, you should, because that's going to help your student learn more, including prior knowledge, making connections, taking the time to learn the students that you have, their learning style, which is what we just looked up here, anxiety levels, especially from learning a new language. And that's a lot of times Texas teachers or teachers across the United States don't realize how much anxiety there is with learning a second language, and so how difficult the task is for every English language learner in the United States, because all the children that came, none of them by their own doing, are now in a new place where they are tasked with performing on grade level with their peers, learning these content specific things, and at the same time acquiring a second language that is necessary in order to do well in those other areas. So there's a lot of anxiety, there's a lot of culture shock, and our kids that are taking language other than English as an elective can experience this anxiety. So it's important that all teachers understand that our ELLs experience that on a daily basis. And then language learning strategies. Other factors, and this is really important, and I'll give you an example why, an unfortunate example why: family attitudes and behaviors in second language acquisition. So if you are a language other than English teacher and you work in this very small community in West Texas, you might have a population of students that don't see the need, other than it's a requirement for high school to take Spanish. And maybe their political leanings don't even think Spanish needs to be taught, or people who speak Spanish are cool or whatever. And so I've worked with interns who do teach, in these areas, history teachers, who teach in certain areas and have difficulty overcoming particular ideologies. And so knowing and assessing that, and then doing your best to build an appreciation for both culture and language before we start hitting them hard with grammar and quizzes and stuff, because they're not going to do well on those assessments without that internal buy-in, that motivation. If they think, well, I don't like Spanish because, I don't particularly, I want to build a wall, and so I don't think, and then maybe you need to come at it, well, actually, Spanish is one of the most spoken languages in the world. And only this population of people on the planet speak another language, and it makes you this much more marketable in every single field and profession that there is. And so coming at them a different way, trying to come at them a million different ways if you have to, if their family attitudes and behaviors are somehow decreasing or negating your ability to promote that second language acquisition. And that's just a reality. I mean, chances are they're not going to give you a specific scenario like that on the test, but in the real world, that is something you might experience, and you have to overcome that. The role of social and interactive processes in second languages acquisition. This is a really big one. And it's one that I wish, again, all Texas teachers sort of understood, not just language other than English teachers. It's especially true for you because that is your content area. But for all other content areas that have students that are acquiring a second language, the students have to be able to use the language, the target language. So that means if you have a class and most of it is direct instruction, that means you are teaching new concepts, you are modeling new things, and very little of them utilizing the language, the progression of language acquisition is going to be stalled. It's going to be less because the role of them practicing and that interactive language is not, language doesn't happen in seclusion because then we will be talking to ourselves. Que lo que era. Language is interactive. It's listening and speaking and back and forth, and it's practice makes perfect. So just like in my English language arts class, and I taught in the Valley, and sometimes I had, like, let's say I had a class of 32 kids, maybe 18 of them are ELL students. And we're talking every day. They're talking every day, not me. I do less talking than them. I'm like, if my voice hurts me, then you guys didn't do your job. And I used to have back in 2005, principals say, oh, your classes are very loud. I'm like, yeah, they're practicing their language. How are they going to acquire a second language if they're sitting there doing a worksheet? It's not going to happen. And when I became an administrator, it was something that I always mentioned to somebody's classroom if I went and they were completely silent, only working on a worksheet. Because for me, I can't assess whether learning is taking place. I might be able to walk around and assess whether, it did take place at some point in time, but I definitely can't assess if their language is getting better because I can't hear them speaking, utilizing content specific vocabulary, talking about the different, questions, inquiry that's posed to them. So a quiet room is a room where minimal learning is taking place, and a quiet room in a language learning room is a death sentence to the language. So the role of social and interactive processes in language acquisition, period, cannot be understated. So that means that you are giving brief, direct instruction, posing poignant questions for your students based on your instruction, based on your modeling and your videos and your visuals, and then letting the students talk to each other. Oh, turn to your partner, Stephanie, turn to your partner and think, pair, share the questions that we just discussed. And then so they'll turn around and say, yo fui a la tienda con mi, or whatever it is that they're supposed to be discussing. So now not only did they think about it or write about it, now they're practicing saying it and the person has to respond to them. And now we're actually in an interactive language scenario. Then as a step further, you could say, okay, class, okay, ahora vamos a ver, ¿quién quiere decir lo que tú y tu pareja estaban hablando de, right? So then somebody raises their hand. So now you have people more willing to participate in whole group discussions because they've already practiced utilizing it with their partner. And there's several activities that you can do. The small cooperative learning groups, the think, pair, shares, find a partner who, and I don't know how you could say that in Spanish, but that activity is so much fun for them to practice language. I use it in my English language classrooms all the time. And typically people, I'm going to move away from this. From this sheet, just so I can show you. find somebody who typically is used in the beginning of the year. They'll utilize, find somebody who has, siblings, and you have to walk around and say, do you have siblings? No, I don't have siblings. I'm an only child. Okay, find somebody else who will go to another person. So it's like a scavenger hunt, and you have questions. And you can't ask, one person all the questions. You have to find a different person. And the kids really like doing it, but you can do it not just, with those sort of non-important social things. You can utilize that, and you should, especially in some of like the younger things. But like how could you change it to Spanish? Find somebody who, encuentra alguien quien, right?
Yes.
Okay, and then so find somebody who tiene un gato, o que puede decirte qué pasó cuando Don Quijote de la Mancha no sé qué. And so they would have to go around and repeat those same things in Spanish. Repeat the question, practice saying the question, and then somebody has to either say it to them, respond to them, and they might be wrong. And so what it does is it allows students to participate, asking and answering the questions, because everybody has to find somebody who, and you can't ask the same person the same question. And it encourages students to begin teaching each other, because like, let's say in my class, I would say, find somebody who can identify Edgar Allan Poe's tone in The Raven, right? And so they're like, can you identify Edgar Allan Poe's tone in The Raven? They're like, yes, it's happy. And they'd be like, no, it's absolutely not happy. It's melancholy. I'm going to go find somebody else. So the person who is asking the question already knew the answer, and the person responding did not know the answer. So they couldn't write them down, but now they know the answer. They still have to find someone who can say the answer. So it's a really good practice in not just the content, but in practicing the language. And for a language other than English class, where your goal is a target second language, it's a very good activity, and you can just use it however you want. It serves as a vocabulary. I just discussed how, or showed you how it provides opportunities for a negotiation of meaning, because sometimes they say, are you sure? I don't think that was the tone. I thought it was melancholy. I mean, it sounds melancholy. Yeah, I'm thinking melancholy because they use the word like this and this and this. So now they're negotiating meaning using the language. Highly motivating, extends opportunities for that oral language practice. And that is the only thing other than direct instruction. And it can't only happen with direct instruction of vocabulary. You have to follow up with the practice, with utilizing that vocabulary in real life. And so with things like content specific vocabulary, like mitosis, they're not really going to go around using mitosis in real life very often. So as a teacher, while I'm teaching mitosis, I have to make sure that I provide opportunities for them to talk about it with each other so that they can use it while I have them, and we'll be able to use it if need be later. So this is a very, very good strategy that you could use, and one that you could use for your lesson plan. The find somebody who as an activity. It's tactile because the kids get up, they have a piece of paper, and they have to move around the room finding someone. It practices audio, it practices listening and speaking skills. I mean, there's just so much you can do with this activity. So when you're preparing for your next exam, I would say take a look at the sample lesson plan scenario and try to already come up with particular strategies that you would use to differentiate, particular strategies that you would use to build language acquisition, which means direct instruction of any new vocabulary or concepts that you're trying to teach. And if they tell you what you have to teach in the scenario, so make sure that you say, these words, I'm gonna do direct instruction of vocabulary. I'm gonna provide examples via the Freire model of the dictionary definition, the denotation of synonyms, of visual representation. If you have video representation, which is a step further than just a picture, amazing. Having them utilize it not only in a sentence, but have them respond in a think, pair, share at the end where they're utilizing it out loud, reinforces that. Making sure that you give them opportunities to practice the language that's learned, that to do a think, pair, share, to do a find somebody who, and then go back to maybe responding to a whole class instruction. And that at the end of all of that, that you check for understanding. So if going with my example I gave you before about, let's say we're trying to build vocabulary around shopping en la tienda, cosas en la tienda. So if we're doing a unit like that, and your lesson is about that, the activities about that, they have to cut out things in the magazine that they would find in the tienda, and then make a mall and write the different names on it. At the end of your activity, at the end of your lesson, your instruction, there should be a point before, at the end of your lesson, where you can assess the students informally. So you would walk around while they're doing their think, pair, shares, listening to them, checking for understanding in that way, listening to small cooperative learning group discussions as a means to gather data on their language and where they're at, how they understand the concepts, but then maybe an exit ticket where you ask them a question and they respond back, so that you can assess. If I have 31 kids and I wanted for them to, be able to use vocabulary associated with la tiendas, then I need to be able to assess that and check for understanding, give the students time to reflect on what they know and show you what they learned. Okay, do we have any questions?
No. I'm writing that down just to have those tips for when I'm writing the practice lesson plan.
Absolutely.
Those are good ideas for activities.
Absolutely. So exit ticket, there's also, if you want to be fancy, there's like electronic exit tickets where there's like I'll find you the name of it. There's so many and I can't think of one. My brain is pulling a blank. But it is where you can, if the students have personal devices, whether it's their cell phones, their iPads or computers, they can log in. You send them the link, they log in, and you pose the question and they respond to it and submit it, and it goes up onto the screen. So everybody sees the different responses, the different exit ticket. You can have them do it on a sticky note and post it, on the door before they leave, their response to the question, the way that you check for understanding, whatever it is that you did. What you're going to want to make sure you include for sure in your lesson is a good sort of lesson introduction where you build background knowledge for the students on what they're going to be doing for the day, the vocabulary that they will be, the new vocabulary that they will be encountering, your direct instruction of that, your modeling of their activity. And if you ever ask the students for something, let's say a foldable, let's say I'm going to do a foldable of words for la tienda, and I could say la tienda, and what do you say to a cat? What is the word for cashier?
Cajera.
The what?
La cajera.
Okay, so that could be another one. And so if I am doing a foldable and doing the different things there, then and the kids need to do one as well, then I need to show them a finished product so that the students have visualization and a rubric with which to gauge their expectations. Like, this is what I need to make. I'm modeling not only the language, but the activity itself that I want to be done, so that there's less confusion during the actual them doing of it. Then as they're doing it, you are moving about the classroom, listening to the and I suggest that in your lesson, your activity include small groups in some way, whether it be a small group activity, it could be a think, pair, share activity, partnering activity, but something that requires the students to do something a little bit on their own, maybe think about a couple of questions, but then come to a group and complete an activity together. and you moving around checking for understanding, and then having the students respond to an exit ticket, or doing a whole class discussion, and having different groups present their tiendas, or like their shops, the different things they put in their tienda, like everything that belongs in it. And so you could have them even for an activity. I'm just still sticking with the whole vocabulary with the tienda thing, but having them do like an advertisement for their tienda, right? Where they would have to use like appropriate words, put the visuals of the different things, utilize maybe numbers correctly, like sale prices or other things that you might have discussed that you could review and rebuild, which is another aspect of our teaching. We don't just teach things once and then leave them there. Anytime we can check for understanding in something we've already gone over. So you've already gone over numbers and stuff, you certainly want to have them in an activity that's talking about tiendas, talk about numbers, right? And prices and whatnot. And so stuff like that, and make sure that you're looking at it from all aspects. Make sure that you include how you are supporting your different learners. So for your special ed students, you're going to make sure that you're carefully grouping your students to make sure that you have supports, not only for different proficiency of the language, of the target language, because you will have different proficiency, and you don't want to have all beginners in one group and all high speakers, or kids with some basis for understanding in one group. You want to spread it out so that there's meaningful learning experiences and dialogue within the grouping. So make sure that you note that in your lesson, that you've taken that into consideration when you're creating your groups, that you're grouping in carefully to make sure that it's a supportive and meaningful group experience, and that you have different proficiencies of language, different academic sort of, not proficiency levels, but like strengths, if you will, different diversity, certainly diversity, big time, ethnic and socioeconomic, to have the best support, the most meaningful perspectives. It's not all one stagnant same. And that will help your students, because if you do have some students that, let's say, are sort of lower performing academically with some higher achieving students within the same group, they're going to help each other and learn from each other, both the high achieving student from the lower achieving and vice versa. So making sure that you include that, you're mindful creating of your groups of student learners so that they get the maximum benefit of the group experience. And again, that you're walking around checking for understanding, even inserting yourself into the conversation if need be. I would do that all the time. I loved it when I had enough, but typically I didn't, because my classes were always very jam-packed. But if there were extra desks, I would sit down and add myself to a group, especially if I felt the group was getting off topic, or maybe they were confused. I'm not going to go in there and take over, but I'm certainly going to try to steer them and clarify areas of misconception right then and there. It's called giving direct feedback. And direct feedback is something that helps the student progress and change in their learning right then and there, as opposed to later when you give an assessment and you say, oh, you got these things wrong, and there's no change in the experience. So interject yourself as needed with the students, because you are the best model of language. So whenever you're introducing yourself and talking and speaking to the kids about the lesson, about the activity, about the content, the better they are going to be at acquiring the language and understanding the task at hand.
Okay.
Okay, I'm so sorry that I'm gonna have to end it with you, but I have somebody else in 4 minutes, and I'm gonna go use the restroom and grab a drink. But if you would like to meet again, we can certainly do that. All Teacher Builder students get free one-on-one tutorial with me the first time, and then they get me at a significant discount, 50% off, than the rest of the state of Texas interns. So please let me know if you would like to meet again so we can go over some particular questions concerning
Okay.
CPR.
Oh, okay. Already then. I will. Thank you so much. If I have I know that one of the preparation materials comes with a lesson plan, kind of like a sample.
Yes.
If I do it, can I send it to you so you can kind of like give me a little bit of
Absolutely. Yeah, I would love to take a look at it. So yeah, I can certainly do that for you. And I am going to upload, because remember I sent it to you and you said it only brought up one, right? It didn't give you access to all of this.
Yeah, no, it didn't.
Okay, I'm gonna make sure that you get access right now. I'm gonna put it in the chat box right now for you. If you could just click on it and open it just to make sure it opens, and then just save it in your browser.
Okay.
Also this evening, or in a little bit after I upload this video, I'm going to send you a copy of the link so you can rewatch it to if you need to review what we discussed, or you want to go back and think about like, what did she say about assessments for my lesson plan, you can go back and review that. Please subscribe to the channel. I would really appreciate it, and like any of the videos that you watch, I also would appreciate it. And I really, I hope that you do well, and that I helped you in your endeavors to becoming a teacher.